Welcome to the afternoon session of the 2017 annual bookkeeping workshop. We have three people here today from State Board of Accounts. We're going to start with Tyler Michael, and he will be followed by Linda Baker, who will talk about the 100R and the annual financial report, and then we'll close with Todd Caldwell. Your host here, this is Karen Ainsley. I'm a public library consultant here at the Indiana State Library. So we're going to start with Tyler, and he's the Director of Communications at the State Board of Accounts.
Thank you very much. As Karen said, my name is Tyler Michael. If any of you guys attended, what do we say, in June, a similar workshop in June, I gave a very similar presentation then. So there's going to be some of this that's repeat, and I apologize for that. But we have added to it, added more details, and wanted to make sure that you had all that information. And ultimately, I don't think it's bad to hear this a second time. So we'll get started. We creatively labeled this presentation Finding Resolutions. I say we, I'm not creative enough to come up with anything like that, but I stole it from somebody else and I'm using it. We'll circle back around and kind of finish on that note as well at the end. This whole presentation is about House and Old Act 1031. The basis of that is repeat findings. If there is a comment in one of our reports in 1 year, we come back and perform engagement in the future. You have the same or substantially the same finding in that report as well. At that point in time, it becomes a repeat finding. And that's really the background, what this whole statute's talking about. Mentioned it was a House bill, became a House and Old Act, and then effective July 1, it became that statute, IC 511-5-1.5. I should have mentioned long before now, but at any point in time, if you have any questions, yell at me online. I think Karen's monitoring the questions. If you have any questions, please let me know. I want to make sure we're on the same page before I leave here today. Going back to the actual presentation, the last point there is says Representative Slager. This bill was authored by Representative Slager. He is a representative from, I believe he's from Northwest Indiana, and he's got a background in local government. It's my understanding he spent about 10 to 12 years on the board of a local conservancy district up in Northwest Indiana. This was not a bill that we sought out. We didn't go out and say, hey, and push for this and say we want this. It is a bill that we supported, but it's not something, like I said, that we sought out. Before we really get into the statute, what the statute says and how we're going to apply that, we want to make sure we're on the same page with a couple definitions. First, in the statute, they use the terminology finding. When they say finding, they're talking about any noncompliance that goes in the report. For those of you, and there's probably not many, but for those of you that have a federal audit, you may have federal findings. This applies to federal findings as well as what we call results and comments. Those noncompliance issues that are noncompliant with state statute or one of our uniform compliance guidelines. So this applies to both federal findings and results and comments. The statute uses terminology examination or examination report. To me, examination has a very specific definition. That is one type of engagement that we perform in addition to audits, reviews, special investigations, all these different types of engagements. But when they use examination or examination report, they're using that in a general term, and it just means any engagement or any engagement report that our office completes. The last definition we'll look at is Audit Committee. When they talk about the Audit Committee, they are talking about a very specific group of people. The Audit Committee is made up of 5 legislators. Not loud enough? All right. Sorry. These legislators, this Audit Committee was created in statute 3 or 4 years ago, and they act as our agency's oversight board. They have a hand in appointing our board. Our 3 board members are appointed by the governor, but they are confirmed by this Audit Committee. And like I said, they are our agency's oversight board. And as you see, as we'll go through this, they have a role in this as well. So over the next 7-8 slides, I'm just going to outline what the statute says. If you go online on our website, and I know Kansas, they'll put it on their website as well. In the notes to the presentation, I put verbatim what the statute says, just so you have that available. But I'm boring enough the way it is. It's right after lunch. I don't want anybody to fall asleep, so I'm not going to read those statutes to you or even give them to you on the slide so that you can read them yourself and fall asleep. So, like I said, I'll just point out a couple things as we go through this, and then we'll talk in more depth after that. So 511.5 1.5 Section A just defines who this law applies to. It says an audited entity. Within that, one of the options is a municipality. So for libraries, you fall under that definition of municipality. So fortunately or unfortunately, however you look at it, this law does apply to you guys. Part B basically just says if there is a finding in a report, it is the audited entity's responsibility to fix that non-compliance issue. This doesn't add a whole lot. I kind of always saw this as being a little intuitive. Hey, if we're not in compliance with something, we need to fix it. But that wasn't written anywhere before. So that is in the statute now. If there's non-compliance, you have a responsibility to correct that. Part C is where we take this one step further. If there is a repeat finding, again, where we have there's a non-compliance issue in one report, come back the same or substantially the same non-compliance issue in the next report, at that point in time, it becomes a repeat finding. If you have a repeat finding, you will be required to submit a corrective action plan to our office. And I will, like I said, we'll get more details after I outline the statute. This is one of the areas where we'll really dig in what goes in that corrective action plan, how to submit it, when to submit it, that type of thing. Part D says for the corrective action plan, our agency, the State Board of Accounts, is required to come up with the guidelines for that, what goes in that. It's pretty open-ended for us, but there's one stipulation that says that the corrective action plan has to be completed within 6 months. So for the most part, it's pretty open-ended. It told us we can put whatever we want in those guidelines, like I said, with the one exception that it has to be completed within 6 months. Part E basically says when the corrective action plan is completed, the audited entity has the responsibility to notify us that the non-compliance issue has been corrected. At that point in time, we will review that, make sure that you truly are in compliance at this point, and then we'll move on. If there's a situation where the audited entity refuses to supply us a corrective action plan, or if they supply us with the corrective action plan and then don't follow through with that, at that point in time, it tells us that we have to prepare a memo to the Audit Committee, just stating the facts of the situation. Hey, this X library had this non-compliance issue. This is what their plan was. They've failed to follow through with that. So the last part there in Part E, we prepare the memo to the Audit Committee. Part F is where we then turn around and submit it to the Audit Committee. At that point, the Audit Committee has 7 options. The first option being they can request a public officer of the audited entity. For you guys, it could vary, but most likely it would be either the director or a treasurer, if those are different people. Could be one of those people, one of those individuals. They can request the public officer write a statement to the Audit Committee explaining from their standpoint what the situation is, what the non-compliance was, why it has or has not been corrected. The next step is they can require the attendance of the public officer and make you come down and attend their Audit Committee meetings. Currently, the Audit Committee meets once a year. They just had a meeting late in October this year. We don't know for sure, but our assumption is with this new law, with some added responsibilities they have here, that they will meet a little more often. And I think our hope is that they will meet a little more often, at least twice a year, but we're not sure exactly how that's going to work. The next step that the Audit Committee can take, and if we're at this point where our agency has submitted a memo to the Audit Committee, I'm not sure what this third step adds, but they can just turn around and tell the library, hey, you need to take corrective action. Like I said, if we're to this point, we're already past that point. So I'm not sure exactly what that adds, but it does give them that option. The fourth option that they have, they can turn around and notify the officer of the library. If you have a chief executive officer as well as your board, and just let them know, hey, this is what's going on. The officer has failed to take action on this noncompliance issue, and just inform them of what's going on. If the noncompliance is in the report, it falls under one of two statutes, and those statutes are 511-110 and 511-125. The Audit Committee has the option to notify the local prosecutor. The reason for that being those two statutes, it's 511-110 and 511-125, within those statutes say if you fail to comply with this law, it's a Class C infraction subject to removal from office. And it's up to the prosecutor to pursue that if that's the case. So, like I said, if the noncompliance is with one of those specific laws, the Audit Committee can notify the prosecutor of that. The sixth out of seventh options that they have, and this is the biggest one, I think this is the one that we feel is most important, is obviously as legislators, they sit there, they can enact law change, or they can pursue law change. So this is the one that we are most excited about, the possibility of them clarifying a law or changing a law if necessary, whatever it takes to find a resolution to these noncompliance issues. But they have the ability, obviously, to do that. The last option the Audit Committee has is just to basically turn around and tell office, hey, you need to go in and perform another engagement on this unit, on this library immediately. Typically, we have a risk assessment thing. We perform engagements up to once every 4 years, but they have the ability to say, hey, you need to go do this again immediately. So we'll dig a little bit more in depth now. Before we do that, after we give a general overview of the statute, do we have any questions at this point? Yes, sir.
Tyler, effective July 1, what about findings that might have happened prior to that? Do they carry over with the new statute or not?
All right, so the question was the statute's effective July 1. How is this going to carry over from findings that happened prior to that? And if you don't mind, I'm going to hold you off for just a minute, and we'll get to that. And if I don't answer your question in a few minutes, let me know, and I'll make sure I address that. So as I noted before in the definitions, this applies to federal findings. If the library gets and expends more than $750,000 in any given year, you're required to have a federal single audit. That's the only time, if you have a federal audit, is the only time you would have federal findings. But if you are in that situation, and I know there are a few libraries that way, is the only time you would have to worry about the federal findings. Again, this also applies to our results and comments. In the past, we've always had some discretion in that. So if we come in, we find noncompliance, we evaluate that and say, yeah, this is important enough, we're going to put it in the public report. Or we're going to say, no, this isn't something that needs to be public, we're just going to give you a verbal comment and tell you, hey, yeah, you're not in compliance, not a huge deal, something that you do need to address and correct before you come back, but not something we'll put in the public report. Moving forward, we still are going to have those two options, but we're also going to add a third option in between. And we're going to put this third level, we're going to put items in a management letter. So basically what this looks like is we come in, we find noncompliance. If we determine that noncompliance is substantial and impactful to your library or your citizens, then we're going to put that in the public report. If we come in and we find noncompliance and we determine that noncompliance issue is isolated and trivial, we're going to just make it a verbal comment. We're just going to discuss that with you and say, hey, we're not in compliance. We need to make sure we address that. In between that are these management letter level type comments. Basically, if we find noncompliance and it doesn't meet one of those first two definitions of being either substantial and impactful or trivial and isolated, then it's going to go in that middle management letter. Moving forward, we anticipate most noncompliance issues that we find will make their way to the management letter. This management letter we'll give you a draft of that at our exit conference. You'll be able to see that. It'll then go through the same review process that the rest of our reports do, and then when we issue your public report, we'll also send to you your management letter. From our standpoint, that management letter is not a public record. So if somebody comes to us and says, hey, I want Rockville Public Library's management letter for this year, they submit a public records request, we're going to deny that. That is part of our work papers. we're going to say, no, you can't have it. The other side of that, and we're not sure exactly how this is going to work, is if somebody comes to you and says, hey, I want your management letter that State Board of Accounts issued you, we're not sure if that's public record from your standpoint or not. And we've kind of put that back on the associations and the local units themselves to do that research, reach out to the public access counselor and find out if that is public record from your standpoint. And as of now, I haven't heard if anybody's done that, reached out and done that research yet. But like I said, from our standpoint, that management letter won't be a public report. Timeline of when we are implementing all of this. So, as the gentleman stated, the law went into effect July 1. We're obviously way past that at this point. Because of the change that we've had to make, because of this law, the training that we've done with not only our own staff, but you guys and other public officials, we have delayed the implementation of this to some degree. So for the management letter, for any engagement that we have an exit conference with you after October 1 of this year, we're going to start issuing that management letter. So if you've had an exit with us in the last month, you may already be aware of some of this. It probably hasn't happened, but there is that possibility. For the corrective action plan, we are going to require the corrective action plan beginning with engagements that we begin after December 1 of this year, and that we also exit with after February 1 of 2018. That's very confusing. Why we have two dates in there, I'm not really sure, but that's what the plan is. So if we begin your engagement on your library after December 1st of this year, and we exit with your library after February 1st of next year, is when you'll be required to submit the corrective action plan. I'll get to your question in just a minute. So I already addressed this public records question. Everything I said in regards to the management letter being a public record or not, all that applies to the corrective action plan as well. So from our standpoint, that's part of our work papers. If somebody requests that corrective action plan, again, we're going to deny that. They're not going to be able to have access to that. Again, from your standpoint, we still need to do that. Somebody still needs to do that research and work with the public access counselor on that. All right, so for the corrective action plan, one of the reasons we don't want that to be public record, we want you to be very detailed in this. We want you to feel comfortable putting whatever you need to put in there to explain to us what steps you're going to take to correct the noncompliance issue. I'll go ahead and say this now. So the reports that are already public, as of today's date, or as of whenever we start performing your engagement, whatever was the most recently released public report from our agency is going to be the baseline. So at that point forward, any finding that is in the public report, again, that is the same or substantially the same that was what was in that most recently released public report will be a repeat finding. And I know I did not explain that well at all. I'm trying to figure out how to clarify. So any report that is already out there in public, the next time we come in, we're going to use that report as a baseline. If there's a repeat finding moving forward, you'll be required to do the corrective action plan. Again, as long as we start your engagement after December 1 and exit after February 1. Does that answer your question, sir? Okay. Hopefully that was, I did a terrible job of explaining that. So hopefully that kind of made its way out there and it was a little clear. So what goes in the corrective action plan? First, we're going to start with requesting your name. What library are you with, including what county you're in. So Rockville Public Library, Park County. And I only use that one because that's where I'm from and familiar with that one. Next, you'll have to put the report period. This is almost always January 1, 2000X through December 31st, 2000X. But we want to make sure that we match this corrective action plan up with the correct report. So again, unit name, county you're from, the report period. You'll have to put in the title of the finding. So if it does happen to be a federal finding, that title will be a number. It's usually in the format of 2015-001, 2016-002. Whatever the number of that finding is, you'll include that. If it is a result and comment, an audit result and comment, or examination result and comment, you'll just put the title of that. Typically, it just says condition of records or bank reconcilement. Whatever it says in the report as the title of the finding is what you'll include in the corrective action plan. Next, you'll include a contact person who within your library is responsible for completing this corrective action plan and making sure that everything's followed up with and that this issue is corrected. And with that, we'll ask for their contact information, phone number, email address, that type of thing. The next thing, we want you, in your own words, to restate what the issue was, what the noncompliance issue was. Obviously, when we put a comment in the report, it's kind of structured. We give you the title, then we give you what we call the condition, what we say happened that was a noncompliance issue, and then we give you the criteria, either a state statute, uniform compliance guideline, whatever it was that you didn't follow through with. For this section, we don't want you to just copy and paste that. We want you, again, to write in your own words what happened. You know better than we do what's going on with you in your library, so we want you to, again, in your own words, state the issue. We also are doing that to make sure that you fully understand what the noncompliance issue was. So we'll expect to see that. The next section, I just said don't copy and paste. This one you can copy and paste. For the requirement not followed, whether it be state statute, the uniform compliance guideline, whatever that is, that'll be in the report. That you can copy and paste and put in here. But we do want you to acknowledge that you know what requirement was not followed. The next box will just say unit response. If you agree with a noncompliance finding, great, just put that in there and say, yeah, we agree. If you don't agree, that's perfectly fine, but put in there why you disagree, why the finding should not have been there, why we are wrong, whatever the situation may be, put in there why you disagree, and again, be detailed in that. Next box is the root cause. What happened within your library that caused this to happen? 99% of the time, this is going to be some type of, I believe this is going to be some type of internal control breakdown, whether there are no internal controls or an internal control failed for some reason. Most likely that's going to be the root cause of what led to the noncompliance. Again, here we'll expect you to be detailed. What steps are you going to take to correct this issue? We'll expect you to say, step one, we're going to do this, this, and this. When that's done, we'll move on to step two. Step two we're going to do this, this, and this for that. Again, we'll want to be able to be detailed. When you're done, we have to come back and review that you've completed this. So if you put detailed steps in there, we should be able to come back and follow the steps that you actually then took to follow through with your corrective action plan. The next box is a timeline. This goes hand in hand with that last one, the steps of completion. In the timeline, we'll expect to see you say step one is going to take us a month. Step two is going to take us 2 months. Step three is going to take us a month, and then we're going to be done. So whatever that timeline you expect this to take, we'll expect to see that in there. If for some reason, and I mentioned this earlier, the one guideline they told us we had to put in there was that your corrective action plan had to be completed within 6 months. If there's a situation that your timeline extends beyond 6 months, that's fine, but we'll ask you to explain why it's going to take you longer than 6 months. We do foresee this happening, but we do think it'll be fairly rare that there's an issue that's going to take longer than 6 months to correct. But if there is, there's a box in there to explain why you believe it's going to take longer than 6 months. And then the last box is just a box that says summary, and we'll ask you to summarize how the steps you're going to take is going to correct the issue so that you don't have that noncompliance moving forward. All right, so that's everything that goes into corrective action plan. How do you submit it? When you submit it? We'll get into that now. So at the end of every engagement, we have an exit conference. The corrective action plan will be required to be submitted to us within 10 days of that exit conference. You will, so technically it's going to be required to be submitted to us within 10 days. However, we are asking you to put a lot in there and to be very detailed with that. So we understand that 9 times out of 10 it's going to take you a lot longer than 10 days to complete that corrective action plan, which is fine. Yes, it's required within 10 days, but if you can't get it done within 10 days, we're going to ask that you at least contact us within 10 days. and you'll contact us through this email address. And it's just cap@sboa.in.gov. That's CAP is Corrective Action Plan. Within 10 days of exit, we'll either expect to see the Corrective Action Plan submitted, or we'll expect to hear from you and say, hey, and acknowledge, hey, we're working on this. We know this is required, but we need more time. We've not come across any situation that we can think of where we would deny that request, but we do want some type of acknowledgement within 10 days that you acknowledge, you know you have to do this and that you're working on it. How you'll do this. At the exit conference, our field examiners will give you a template with the Corrective Action Plan, some instructions, kind of basically what I just went through, the instructions on what to put in each box. And then they will also supply you a list or a link to a form on our website, and that is where you will actually go to fill this out. It's very basic on our website. It just has kind of to the left, it says this is what goes in the box, and then to the right, you can just type in there whatever you want. There is, for the date, it formats it for you, so you got to put in the correct date. But for the most part, they're just boxes that you go in there and you type your information in that box. And then at the bottom, just hit submit, and that'll send an email to our office. At that point in time, you're done with the submission aspect of that Corrective Action Plan. We'll get that email, and then we'll acknowledge with you, hey, we got your Corrective Action Plan. This looks great to us. Proceed. So for those of you, if you don't get a federal audit, if you're never going to get a federal audit, you can tune me out for a minute. I know everybody's already tuning me out, but I'm giving you permission for a couple minutes. If you are in a situation where you have federal monies, if you have a federal finding, you're already required to do a Corrective Action Plan. The Corrective Action Plan that goes in the report for that is usually pretty generic and just says, hey, we're gonna fix this. It's not much more detailed than that typically. So if you have a situation where you have a repeat finding that is a federal finding, you are required to do both Corrective Action Plans. In that situation, we know some people may not want to do two separate Corrective Action Plans, and that's fine. If this is your situation, you want to do it just once, you can do that, but you're going to be required to do our more detailed Corrective Action Plan. Two issues with that. One, the federal Corrective Action Plan goes in the public report. So if you do our more detailed Corrective Action Plan for this, it'll go in the public report. The second thing is the Corrective Action Plan for federal findings is required before we can have an exit conference with you. So you're going to lose that 10 days or more to fill that out and be detailed with that. So we want you to have that option. If you want to just do one Corrective Action Plan instead of two for federal findings, you can do that. We think most people will still just do the two separate Corrective Action Plans. All right. Tune me back in again for everybody that just quit paying attention. All right, so you submit the Corrective Action Plan. Do you have a question? Did I see a hand up in the back? All right, maybe not. So you submit the Corrective Action Plan to us. We'll tell you, yeah, this looks great. Go ahead. Then you'll go out and get busy, and you'll go through the steps in your Corrective Action Plan, and you'll complete that. You'll fix the noncompliance issue. When you do finish your Corrective Action Plan, by the statute, you're required to contact us and let us know that it's completed. Again, we'll use the same email address. It's just CAP again, but you'll just send us an email and say, hey, we're done. At that point in time, we have to review and verify that that noncompliance issue isn't going to continue going on. The nature of the noncompliance issue is going to kind of lead us on how we perform this review and verification. If it's just something simple enough where your board approves a policy or passes an ordinance or resolution, we may just have you email that to us, and we can review that in our office and say, yeah, you're great, let's go move on. It also may be something where we have to send one of our field examiners back out to work with you for a day or two to verify that all these steps, what you said in your Corrective Action Plan is actually done. Again, if for whatever reason you don't submit a Corrective Action Plan to us, or you submit a Corrective Action Plan to us but don't follow through with it, after 6 months we will send a memo to the Audit Committee. And in that, again, we'll just say, this is the unit, this is the issue, this is what they said their plan was going to be, they didn't follow through with it. If it is a situation where your corrective action plan is going to take more than 6 months, you put that in your corrective action plan. We are still required to send a memo to the audit committee after 6 months. But if you are following along with your corrective action plan, we'll put that in a memo and say, hey, this library, this is their issue, this is their corrective action plan. They're on path with that. They are working towards this. And we'll be upfront and transparent with that. But we will still be required to send that memo to the audit committee at that point in time. All right, so I told you we would come back to this finding resolutions title, and I told you I didn't want to read stuff to you. I am going to read one thing to you briefly. As they were going through the process of having hearings on this law and meetings and everybody working to get this law passed, Representative Slager was interviewed, I believe it was in the Terre Haute Tribune Star, and I pulled this quote out of there. But in that article, he said, or he was quoted as saying, "I remember saying, rather than spending time writing letters trying to justify why we do things differently, why don't we just fix the problem?" A little context, this went back to his days when he sat on the board of the local conservancy district. I kind of foresee that they had a couple non-compliance issues that they didn't correct and want to correct, whatever the case may be, and they were trying to justify why they were doing what they were doing instead of what the law said they were supposed to be doing. And that was his thought behind this was, let's not justify why we're doing something differently. Let's find a resolution to it and stop the non-compliance. So that's where the law came from. We don't see this as a local government unit problem. We see this as a problem that is statewide, that is a problem for our agency as well as local government units. This is not something that we're trying to attack you and say, hey, you have to do this, you have to work on this, you have to correct it. We want to partner with you, we want to work with you on that. So with that, anytime that we find noncompliance, and no matter if that noncompliance is going to go in, is going to be a verbal comment, if it's going to go in a management letter, if it's going to go in your public report, our field examiners will be supplying you with potential solutions to those issues. These potential solutions are just that. As your auditing agency, we cannot make management decisions for you. We can't tell you, hey, you have to do this to correct this noncompliance issue, but we can give you suggestions. So again, every noncompliance issue that we find, our field examiners are going to give you potential solutions. You can take these, you can combine what they tell you, the suggestions they give you. You can come up with your own. You can completely disregard what they say. But we do want to partner with you and work with you to get rid of these non-compliance issues. I think our ideal scenario would be that we will go out, we would perform every engagement that we have to perform in a given year and never write anything up because it's not there, it doesn't exist. Now, realistically, I know we're never going to get there, but that's our goal. We don't want to write stuff up. We don't want there to be non-compliance. We don't want to find non-compliance. So we want to work with you to get rid of those things. We spent a fairly extensive amount of time this summer and into this fall training our staff, not only on what items should go in a public report and on those definitions of substantial and impactful versus trivial and isolated, but we also train them on this and on giving you these potential solutions and making sure that they know and understand what their responsibilities are with this. The last point here, the law is not set up this way. It's not set up as an appeals process, but we think it's going to work that way to some degree. In the past, when there's been a situation where we write somebody up and they say, you're interpreting the law wrong, you are absolutely wrong in writing us up, what's our appeals process? Our answer has always kind of been, well, tough luck, there is no appeals process, you just have to deal with it. You've always had the opportunity to file an official response that goes in the public report. That won't change, you'll still have that ability. But with this new law, if there is that situation where we write you up and you just completely disagree, we'll still go through all the process, we'll still go through the corrective action plan process, we'll write the memo to the audit committee, but at that point in time, we'll turn it over to them and say, hey, this law is not clear. We interpret it one way, they interpret it another way, you need to clarify what's going on. And kind of in that way, we think it's going to work as an appeals process, and we'll just turn it over to the audit committee, and we'll let them clarify the law, come up with a new law, get rid of a law, whatever the situation may be. We'll turn over to them, and we'll let them help us find a resolution and come to a resolution on to these issues. So I don't think I have anything else. So before I take off, do we have any questions about this, implementation of this, timeline? All right. Everybody's sufficiently asleep? Good. Good, good. I always like my nap right after lunchtime. So,
Karen?
no, you're fine. So, the question was, do we review your budgets effectively? We are the State Board of Accounts. We are the auditing agency. DLGF, Department of Local Government Finance, is the agency that deals with your budgets. So when your fiscal year is done, or multiple fiscal years are done, we will come in and then we'll perform an audit or an examination, whatever the engagement is, on your unit from a financial standpoint, but also from a compliance standpoint. So compliance with state laws, uniform compliance guidelines, other ordinances and resolutions, whatever the situation may be. So for we perform there. So there's a statute, and it's 511. I messed this up somewhere. It's 511. I am. It's 511-125, which means I threw out a wrong statute earlier because I already used that once. So I gave you an incorrect statute earlier. This statute is 511-125, governs the frequency of our engagements. So it basically tells us that we, on a risk-based approach, we can determine how often we perform an engagement. There are some risk factors that they put in there that we have to consider. And then there's a caveat that says it cannot exceed once every 4 years. So basically, at least once every 4 years, we will perform an engagement on your library. That's what the statute says. We are behind. We are trying to catch up. So we are currently doing some engagements that are 5, 6, 7 years late in length. But ideally, it'll be at least once every 4 years. Engagement is not necessarily party. Yeah. So we perform the different engagements that we perform. We will do an audit. We'll do an examination. We'll do a review. We may do a compliance review, a special investigation. Those are a few of the different engagements that we perform. Most likely on libraries, we're probably doing what's called an examination. It'll still be a review of your financial information, as well as some compliance review as well. No problem. Yes. Very good way to look at it.
Somebody made a comment in the room that the DLGF handles the budget end, the front end, the budget, and the planning, and that the State Board of Accounts comes in on the back end to make sure you did it right as far as how the expenditures and so forth. All right, thank you, Tyler.
Thank you very much.
I'm going to take a minute here and switch the screens. And we're going to have Linda Baker, who does data at the State Board of Accounts. And she's going to talk to us about the 100R and the annual financial report. So basically what you do in the gateway. I'm going to go there. It doesn't matter. We're good. So let's see, you can put your URL in there. And take it away.
Good afternoon. I'm going to start out on our State Board of Accounts webpage, because if you forget how to get to Gateway or where to go, this is the easiest place to find the link to go to Gateway. You'll go to at our Board of Accounts webpage at www.in.gov/SBOA. And then under political subdivisions on the left-hand side, then you'll go to libraries. And you'll have a lot of information here about libraries, including Todd and Susan's phone numbers. And then as you scroll on down, there's a section on Gateway and on the annual financial report and 100R. And there's a link right at the top that says log into live site. So that's where you can go to log into the Gateway. When you get to the login screen, you're going to put in your login, which is your email address. And your password. Also, if you don't have a login and password, then you're going to need to email our help desk at gateway@sboa.in.gov. And you'll email us and let us know that you're the new official, the new library treasurer at this library, and that you don't have an ID yet, and you need to get one set up. The library treasurers are the ones that are responsible for submitting the annual report on Gateway. So when you get logged in, there's multiple applications on here, some of which you don't apply to you. The ones on the left-hand side under the green title there are all DLGF applications, and then the ones on the right-hand side under this maroon bar, Board of Accounts applications. And the two that you'll be interested in doing is the 100R and the annual financial report. As you can see, the 100R deadline is January 31st. So after you've had your Christmas ham and opened all your presents, you'll be thinking, oh, pretty soon got to be doing that annual report and 100R, right? Soon after the new year. Okay. So the 100R, when you go into it, you'll get a list of units that you have assigned to you. I'm going to go into this library test unit that I've set up. And then this still doesn't have, it still says 2016 is the most recent. We don't have the 2017 on the live site yet, but you'll be selecting 2017. And then when you first go into it, you first get some questions. The first one is how many employees that you have paid during the year. So you're going to enter that in, say however many you have, and click proceed. And then you're going to answer these questions. Are you going to enter your data manually or do an upload? If you have your employee information, compensation information in a vendor system, a payroll system, etc., you can probably download that information and then upload it into Gateway. There's information on our website where we're on our website to tell you what format that needs to be in and how to do that. And you'll need to get with your computer vendor to set that up. So if you have a lot of employees, you'll want to probably do the upload if possible. If not, you'll click manual and do the manual entry, which means you're just going to type them in on the screen. If you have a small group of employees, that's probably the easiest thing to do. And then the other questions are some questions that are in the law about whether you have health benefits, pension, or other benefits for full-time and part-time employees. So you're just going to answer those questions. Then when you get to the main menu here, we're going to go into the employee data entry. And for however many employees you said you had at the beginning, it's going to set up the number of rows you need for those number of employees. I've already uploaded some data in here. I think it happens to be for a school because I just uploaded some data I have. That's why some of these job titles say teacher, etc. But anyway, and so some of these might not look like for a library, but it's the same idea. You're just going to enter all of your employees and how much their business address, their job title, and their compensation. So if you need to add a new person, you click Add Row, and you'll get a blank row to add it on down here at the bottom, and you just enter it on that row. If you enter one by mistake or need to delete one, you click the little red X and that'll delete it. The main tip I give you on this and on a lot of the screens is to enter your data just going across in a row. And as you enter it, if you do make a mistake or leave a field blank that's required, you'll get an error message. Like when I hit enter now, see I'm getting an error message that the compensation must be greater than 0 because I haven't filled that in. So you'll get error messages if you hit enter or save if you haven't filled everything in. So that's the manual data entry screen. Also up here at the top there's some helpful hints you'll want to read if you've not done this before. And also under this link at the top where it says user guides. All the user guides are in here for the 100R and the annual report. If you have questions, I recommend looking at that, and it gives you a lot of screenshots and step-by-step help. So I recommend checking that out. Sometimes that will answer your question. And after you've entered all your information, you can go to this 100R output reports, and you can print out a listing of all the information that you've entered, either in a PDF or you can download it to Excel. And if that's easier for you to review it that way than on the screen, you can do that so you can review all your information and make sure it's correct. And once you're satisfied that everything's been entered correctly and you're ready to submit, you're just going to click the submit button. It gives you a summary of the information to kind of tell you whether you've made any mistakes, the number of employees, and for example, a minimum and maximum salary and the total salary. So if you saw you had a maximum salary of $10 million, you may think, I might have added extra 0 somewhere that I didn't intend to, unless you have a high-paid people at your library. I don't know, but anyway, so that might clue you in that you've made a mistake, and then you can exit out and go back and correct that. So after you've reviewed that, then you can say proceed to submit and read the certification there, and then you're going to click submit, and then it comes back and it tells you this report has been submitted. And so then you're done. It also has the date and time that it was submitted. And then in the past, we've had this attestation form that you had to download and mail in. I'm hoping I'm going to make your day by telling you that this is going away. 2017 report, this will no longer be there. So once you've submitted and you get back this information, say it's submitted, you're done. You can go have your coffee, take a coffee break. There's no more attestation form. Okay. We're going to save some trees there. So that's our bit for the environment, save some trees. Okay, so that's the 100R. So is there any questions on that?
When is the last time your technology folks have considered the document itself that you upload as a CSV? Because every year I end up exchanging at least 3 emails with them.
Okay, I guess
Something that's out of whack, some minor thing that I can't see visually. I end up sending them my Excel document. They change whatever that one thing is.
Okay.
And then I upload.
Yeah, I can let them know that and see if they can do it that way in the future.
I mean, there's something that's just, something that, and I have about 95 staff, so it's just trying to make sure that I get it done.
Okay, thank you for that suggestion. He suggested that we could do could we do a CSV file for the upload in the future?
No, y'all do a CSV file.
Oh, you don't want a CSV?
Y'all use one, and I'm asking when's the last time y'all tried to look at that and potentially simplify it? No, y'all.
As far as doing it in a different format?
Yes, and or simplifying that CSV file, because it's been the same.
Yeah, if you could, that's a problem with Excel. Okay, I wasn't sure what you're asking.
I'm sorry,
That's
that's
a
my fault.
problem with Excel. If you have a CSV file and you save it in Excel, then it saves it as an Excel, and it puts extra weird Excel characters in there. So you just want to make sure you don't save it as Excel, that it's and stays in the original CSV format. Yeah, so that might be what your problem is. But yeah, if you do have specific questions on how to upload the documents, then yeah, you can email our help desk. Then on the annual financial report, under the details on the deadline, it gives the dates it's due. All units are due March 1st, unless it's leap year, it's February 29th, because it's always 60 days after the year end, and then schools have a different year end date. So we're going to go into our chess library unit here again. And again, 2017 is not on the screen yet. So we're going to go into 2016. So when you first go into this annual report the first time, you're going to get a list of a bunch of questions. Whether you have federal grants or not, whether you have debt, leases, etc. And depending on your answers to those questions, you're going to get different screens added to your report. And whether you're going to upload your data or manually enter that as well. And then one of the questions that we had fairly new, I believe it was just last year or the year before, was about whether you have adopted internal control standards, and then whether you've had all your personnel trained on those standards. So one thing we are going to add this coming up annual report is if you say no, that all your personnel haven't been trained, then you're going to get a comment box to fill in why they have not all been trained as of yet. So you can make comments about that. Then another, because we don't have enough questions on here, we're going to add another one. We're going to add another question this year regarding your computer system. If you have your accounting system on a computer system, and what software vendor you have, such as Keystone is one with cities and towns. I'm not sure which ones libraries use, if you have certain vendors that you use, but you're going to get a question about if you have a software vendor and what the name of that vendor is. Well, it's, I think it currently is in the risk assessment portion of the annual report, and we're just going to take it out of that risk assessment and move it to this part of the annual report. So you'll see that question is no longer on the risk assessment. Yeah, there you go. So anyway, after you answer all those questions, we're going to proceed. And again, depending on what you answered the questions, you're going to get different screen options here. Or you won't get the grant screen or the debt or the leases if you didn't answer yes to those questions. For example, the schedule of officials, everybody will fill that out. It just some general information, your office address, the name of the treasurer, and the term of office, etc. So you'll fill all these out. And then one thing I want to point out is this mark complete box at the bottom. You want to make sure you check that box, because even if you fill everything out and save it, it's not going to show on the screen that it's completed unless you mark that box as complete. So like it says complete on that schedule of officials, but if you didn't check that box, it's not going to show complete. So you want to make sure you check that. Financial data by fund. This is what I call the main guts of the annual report, all your funds and their balances, receipts, disbursements. So if you're manually entering it, you're going to click add a fund to this grid and manually enter your different funds you have. If you have all the funds that you had last year, will roll over to the new year with the correct balances. But if you have a new fund that you didn't have last year, you'll need to manually add that. And then the receipts and disbursements, you're going to click the links under those columns there to see the detail of all the receipts to enter. So for example, general property taxes, all the local income taxes, etc., and your federal distribution. So you're going to fill in the numbers on the screen wherever it's appropriate. For example, document and copy fees. So if we enter a number in there, we're going to press the enter key and it's going to update our total here. So that's my helpful hint on this screen, is to make sure when you enter a number, you press the enter key and it's updated your total, and that'll let you know it's saved or taken that number. If you just type the number and leave the screen, it's not going to save it. And then also make sure you click the Save All Work button. And then the disbursements are similar. You have a screen showing all the detail of the type of the disbursements you have. They're divided up by personal services, supplies, services and charges, etc., capital outlay. So you're just going to type in the amount that you have and press enter, and then it will update your total. So you're going to do that for all the different types of disbursements that you have for that fund. And then when you go back to your financial data by fund screen, your receipts and disbursements totals will be updated. And it's going to calculate your ending cash balance. And again, if you do an upload from your accounting system with your vendor, and all that information again is on our website of what all you need to do to upload that. If you do the upload, that's what it's going to upload, this financial data by fund screen, all of your funds, your balances, your receipts, your disbursements. Even if you do the upload, you still have to manually enter in the grants, the debt, this additional information. So again, we've got all these other various screens that you'll need to complete depending on if those apply to you. I'm not going to go over all those. They're another plug for the user guide linked at the top here. They're all detailed in the user guide with screenshots and help if you have questions on some of those screens. One thing about the pensions information, if you do have another pension plan besides PERF, you need to give us more information on those plans. So let's say you have PERF and that's all you have. Do you have any other plans? No. And then you would say this form's complete and save it and you're done. If you do have another outside plan, then you've got to add that plan in here, and you'll have more screens of information to enter from your actuary telling us information about that plan. I don't think too many of you have that situation, but if you do, these screens have changed from last year, so you may see more information that you have to enter or different information on those screens. And then we do have the risk assessment, and I usually recommend going through here and reviewing these questions before you complete it to see what all is required, because some of them do require you to do an upload of, like this uploads for a bank reconcilement and with a copy of the bank statement. So you probably want to go through and see what's required and what you're going to need. And I believe it's also detailed in the user guide of what's required on that section, this section. And that way you can have all your documents scanned in and everything ready to go when you're on this screen. But basically it just goes through and asks you a lot of yes or no questions if you're complying with some different procedures at your library. And then the output reports, when you're done or as you're going along, you can always come in here and print these out and review the data again that you've entered to make sure it's correct. You want to make sure all your ending fund balances are correct and matched with your books. And then when you're sure that everything's correct, you're going to click this review submission, and it will tell you if you have any errors. So I have a lot of errors here because I haven't completed a lot of the sections. That's probably the main errors that you're going to get if you forget to complete a section. It's going to tell you what sections you didn't complete. And again, I want to point out that this is under submission errors. If you have errors, these will need to be corrected before you can submit. But if you have a submission warning, those are just warnings and they won't prevent you from submitting. You can still submit if you have a warning. A warning is something like you have a negative fund balance, which normally you shouldn't have a negative fund balance, but it's possible that you could. So it's going to warn you, hey, you have this fund that's in that negative balance. So you may want to go back and review that, make sure that's correct, or you didn't forget to enter some information on that fund. But if you know that fund does have a negative balance and that's okay, then you can go ahead and submit. Again, once all these errors are corrected and you submit, it's similar to the submission on the 100R that we just looked at. It's going to come back and have a certification that you click on, and then it's going to come back and tell you that it's submitted and the date and the time. And again, just like the 100R, we're going to do away with the attestation form. So we're saving 2 trees instead of just 1 for each one. So that's pretty much all the annual report. Is there any questions on that? Okay, well, thank you, and remember to email the help desk if you have any questions. Thank you.
All right, we just plowed on through last week without a break. Hopefully y'all can do that without a break. Just kind of stand up and stretch if you need to. But I'm going to go ahead and get Todd's presentation here on the screen. I'm just going to close this out. Go away. Oh, don't close all those tabs, Karen. We're just going to do this, because if I close this, we could be in trouble. So we'll close this, and you can open yours. Yeah. That looks good there, but we have your notes over here. So
I don't need those.
Is this where it says display settings?
Perfect.
It looks good.
Okay.
All right. We're going to come back in a minute here, Todd.
Okay.
We're going to wait for them to step out and step back in. So we're going to give you guys just 3 minutes.
Did she say she was a new official?
She's new. She's new. I remember her name. I can't remember her. Shame on me.
It's all right. This will hopefully help her. All of this really. See, I'm trying to think if we say information.
I'm going to take this moment to say that I forgot to put the LEU certificate up this morning. If any of you did not get a chance to download the LEU certificate, please email me at kainsley@library.in.gov, and I'll be sure and get that certificate out to you. Thank you. We'll start here and again in a few minutes. All right, we're ready to get started again.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be back with you. I think one of the things I learned, or two things I learned from the first couple of presenters was the LGF is the front end of the transaction and the Board of Accounts is bringing up the rear. So such is the life of an auditor. And the other thing was, I don't know if you all heard it. I heard it here, the collective hooray from across the state when you found out no more attestation forms. So last week when we said that in the room, there were crickets. Nobody reacted. So I wasn't sure if they really understood what that meant. So this crowd seems to know they're not going to have to mess with that anymore. That was always been something that people had commented to us about not wanting to do, and we had some certain audit procedures we kind of used that for, and that's kind of run its course. So we found the board determined that wasn't any longer necessary, so we've removed that. So before I get started, I wanted to just explain the information that you probably have. It looks a little different than what we've provided in the past, which was just a screenshot of our PowerPoint. Board of Accounts has continuing training, just like y'all are here having continuing training. And one of the things that we did this summer at our annual conference, where all the field examiners from across the state come together, is the directors, like Susan and myself, saw an instructional speaker talk about PowerPoint presentations and how to use them more effectively, and how the PowerPoint should be a visual aid and not the actual presentation. So we've presented a lot of narrative to you that's going to go along with the slides that you're going to see, but we tried not to give the actual slides and then just, in advance so that you can look at them as we go along here. So that's why maybe some of the stuff looks a little different this time. As I mentioned, when we had our State Board of Accounts meeting with everybody from across the state, we had some outside speakers from some different associations, like the Indiana Association or the Association of Indiana Counties. We had someone there from the School Superintendents Association, Association of Cities and Towns. We asked them to come speak to us and talk about what we could do to help their organizations, the different units that they represent. And the one thing that they all said during their speeches was they wanted more information about how the audit progresses, what's involved in the audit, like from our side, or what information they could do or have ready to help the audit go along a little smoother. So that's what we've titled this part, What to Expect from an Audit and How to Prepare for It. I'm sure there's people listening or in the room that have had to request an audit recently. Either it's been a while since we've been there to do the last one, or you just want verifications that maybe you're doing things right, or you're a newer official and you want somebody to come in and just look to see how things look. So we're going to try to address some of those issues today. Let's start with what's required to be audited by the State Board of Accounts. It's found in Indiana Code 5-11-1-9, and it requires an examination of all accounts and financial affairs of every public office and officer. Federal grants also commonly require an annual financial audit, or you might have some debt issuances with your library. A lot of financial institutions or bond rating agencies will want to have audited financial statements from time to time, and a lot of those same banks and rating agencies will accept our audit reports to satisfy that requirement. If you have some debt that requires an audit, or you're getting ready to issue some debt and you need an audit, or you have some other type of reporting, sometimes if you just have a note or a loan, the bank might want audited statements. But if you have some reason to have an annual audit like that, you need to notify us within 60 days of the end of the year. I'm going to give you a statute that's not in your materials that states that. It's Indiana Code 5-11-1-25 and the letter C. I know Tyler mentioned 5-11-125 earlier, that talks about the frequency of our audits and it being based on risk. Within that statute, it talks about if you have a requirement for an annual audit to notify us within 60 days of the end of the year. That way we can modify our annual audit plan of who we're going to do and when we're going to do them, work you in and get that done so you can meet that requirement that you might have.
All right, there's a question about how does the State Board of Accounts determine how often audits are needed and who? Some libraries are audited often and others not.
Yeah, in that statute 5-11-125, it talks about the frequency of our audits being based on risk. And there are some risk factors included in the statute, like you haven't filed required reports on time. That can increase your risk. If you have new officials, like a new bookkeeper or a new treasurer, that can increase your risk. If you had several comments from the prior audit, and we had a concern about those getting corrected, that can be a risk. So there are several things that we have a division in our office called the Engagement Strategies Division, They look at those risk factors and assess risk. They also look at what personnel are available in a particular area and when they might be able to get to a particular unit. So it's based on risk. And if you're more risky, we're going to be there more often. And Tyler mentioned that statute requires once every 4 years. If you're a really good library, you might not see us but once every 4 years in ideal situation. If you've got control issues or problems at your library and you're more risky, we may be there every year until the risk dissipates. So it's just based on risk. Okay. Tyler touched on this a little bit too, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but we use the term audit a lot, but not every engagement is technically an audit. There are 4 basic types of engagements. First one is the federal single audit. That's what we refer to when we're using the term audit. It used to be called A-133. You might have heard that name if you have a lot of federal grants. Now the term is uniform guidance. It's required by federal law when expenditures of federal assistance exceed the threshold amount of $750,000. So I don't know how many libraries end up ever having a federal audit, but you would have to have a substantial grant or series of grants to get you over that $750,000 threshold. And it's calculated by adding the federal grant reimbursements you've received during the period under review. So when we start with an engagement, we're going to look at the grant schedule or the grant section of your annual financial report. So it's really important that that area be as accurate as possible. If you leave a grant off, let's say, and therefore we don't see it, we might not come in and do a federal audit. We might go do another library that does, or another entity that has federal assistance and do them first. And if we come back for some reason, that grant's missed and we don't get there timely, that can impact your grant status, future funding. So you'll make sure you get any federal grants identified so that we can know that you need a federal audit and see that. Next is an examination. Tyler mentioned this too. That's probably most common for libraries. It's for those units that have outstanding debt, but they don't meet the $750,000 threshold. We also do the compliance reports. These are for units also that don't have debt. They have revenues that can be confirmed easily by outside sources, like your just mainly auditor of state or county distributions. They also have a limited number of funds. The lack of debt and expenditures of federal awards plays the most important role in determining when we're going to do a compliance report. These compliance reports don't contain financial statements, but there is a letter in the report that refers the reader to the gateway, the annual financial report filed there. And then a new area is centralized compliance. We're doing those in our office, and these are for units that have no debt. They're really low risk, and they're small enough to have their records transmitted to our Indianapolis office to be reviewed centrally. So we've started with some small township trustees, and we're branching into small libraries. So if you're a really small library, you may have been contacted by us to send your records up, and getting to some small towns too. So if you're a small library, let's say, and you have hand-posted records, and it's maybe not easy to get them transmitted electronically to our office, like you can't scan them, or some of those forms are bigger than 8.5 by 11, and so it's hard to scan those. Let our office know if they contact you about doing a central compliance review, and let them know it's not going to be easy for you to make those electronic and transfer them up there, and we will make arrangements to come get them or meet you halfway or something like that so that we can review them centrally. But I know that's saving some time because the people in the office can just get those in electronically and review those quickly and get reports turned around. There's another type I haven't listed there, and hopefully you don't have to encounter it. It's a special investigation report. Those usually don't end well for someone. We have a special investigations division that go out and investigate fraud or allegations of fraud or just misappropriations of money. So if they come in to look, usually somebody's paying money back or worse. So hopefully you don't have to run into any of those. So when you're reading through a report, a reader may wonder what the goal or the purpose is. And the goals of engagements are to provide an opinion as to the material correctness of the financial statements as presented. So an unmodified opinion means there are no modifications have been made to our opinion. The financial information we state in that opinion is that your financial information is materially correct. A modified opinion lets the reader know that there's a reason or reasons that need to be taken into consideration when relying on the financial statement information. Say you omitted something and we brought it to your attention and you declined to make an adjustment to your financial statement, we would modify our opinion and say, except for, whatever that issue was, everything else was materially correct. For an audit, another purpose is to provide the reader with non-compliance of any federal requirements. So Section 2 findings are related to financial statement compliance, and Section 3 findings in an audit are related to a specific grant that you've received. The third goal or purpose is to provide management with less significant non-compliance of state requirements through the issuance of the management letter that Tyler talked about earlier. So this whole engagement process gets officially started with an entrance conference. The entrance conference is the official beginning of the engagement. We may have already been at your library for a day or two already doing things because it takes some time to schedule some of these meetings. So we may show up and say we're going to have the entrance conference on Wednesday and get with the people that need to be there and have that meeting. So those people that get invited to the entrance conference are those charged with governance, or in your case, the library board, not the council president, as it says on your screen. I did this presentation also for cities and towns and I missed this slide when I was going back and making sure it only referred to libraries. And then it would be management, so a library director or a bookkeeper, not a clerk treasurer or a controller.
We have a question.
Okay, question?
Are you
Oh, I'm sorry.
people typically calling now all the time? That did not used to be the case, in the last couple of times someone has called me.
Yeah, the question was, are the field examiners calling or contacting you prior to the start of an audit? I know many years ago, probably when I started, we would it was more of a surprise type of a situation, but I do see that and I don't know that we have an official policy that says so, but we are contacting people with some leeway just to let you know that, we may call you on a Thursday and say Monday morning we're going to be there. And I'm going to talk about it a little bit in coming up of maybe a reason or two why we do that. But yeah, we are kind of, we're not going to tell you necessarily a month in advance that we're going to be there, but we will give you some, I think in most cases, some notice. So what kind of items are discussed at the entrance conference? Well, first of all, you're going to get introduced to the field examiners that'll be working on the audit. At least it'll be the lead auditor will be there. There may be other staff joining as the audit progresses, depending on, let's say you're a federal audit, and we might have somebody come in just to look at your federal programs while the lead auditor does, some of the other stuff. For an average size, what I would call an average size library, it may just be one person or it may be two people, but the larger it gets, there may be 3 people or 4. It just depends, but that's where you'll at least get to know their names if you don't see everybody that's going to be assigned to the audit. They'll also go over a general overview of audit objectives, management's responsibilities, like management being responsible for the financial statement presentation, the identification of any federal awards, establishing internal controls, following laws, getting the records, that kind of thing. They'll also talk about the audit procedures, informing management of records that are going to be requested. We'll talk about that in a second too. And when the audit is expected to be completed and the expected issuance date of their report. The expectations will be discussed as the entrance conference establishes and informs attendees of a method for open and continued communication throughout the engagement process. Like, how would management and governance like to communicate? Is it phone calls? Is it emails? Is it scheduled meetings? Let's say you're a library and you have someone that only handles the payroll things because you're large enough to do that. When we get into auditing the payroll, would you want us to go directly to that person to obtain information? Do you want us to go through you, copy you on an email if we ask for payroll records? Just how are we going to communicate back and forth during the during the engagement. So in addition to explaining the objectives of the engagement and the responsibilities of management and governance, the field examiners will also inform management of the all-important audit fees and answer any questions regarding the audit process. So at the end of the entrance conference, there'll be a form that the field examiners will present to you to sign that goes into all of those things I just discussed in a lot greater detail. That form's probably 4 or 5 pages long. So feel free to ask for a copy of it after you sign it. That way you can have a copy for your records and go back and read. You know, nobody wants the entrance conference to last all day or anything. So you can go back and read some of that stuff at your leisure. But make sure before you leave the entrance conference, if you've got any questions on anything, to have the field examiner explain that to you and not leave there still wondering some things. Yes?
You mentioned the fee, you mean the fee structure or the actual hourly rate or whatever?
The question was on the fees, what really did we mean, the fee structure or the hourly rate or whatever? That they'll go over what the estimated cost is going to be to give you some idea in the beginning. So every engagement has a budgeted number of days that it should take, which it could be less or more depending on the circumstances. You know, if we get in and the records are poor, that's going to take us longer. If your records are good, we should be done sooner. But they'll go over, you know, the budget for this library is X number of days, the statutory rate is this, so you can expect your audit bill to be in the neighborhood of, you know, X number of dollars, just to let you know up front what you can expect.
We're now in a period where we, the library, directly pay SBOA by check, as opposed to a deduction from our property, from our distribution from the county audit. Is that correct?
So your question was, you're not direct bill, but it's withheld from your distribution?
I'm wondering, I knew there was a law change, and I don't remember.
I think it's still withheld. I think it's still withheld.
Oh, is it?
Yes, for libraries. So the audit, no?
I don't know.
I don't,
I'm asking you.
What I got said it would be withheld.
it would be withheld.
Go back and look at the paper.
I think it's still withheld.
Okay.
I think special districts like regional water and sewer districts and airport authorities and some of the and utilities are the ones that I think were direct billing. Everybody else gets it withheld from a distribution. So we send the audit bill to that county, to the county auditor. They withhold it from your distribution either in June or December, and then they remit what they've withheld for the audit cost to the state treasurer. So it's time for our field examiners to get started. What are they going to do first? The first thing is they're going to identify risks. You know, we talked about the frequency of our audits being risk-based. The things that we do during an audit are also risk-based. The auditing profession has gone to risk instead of, you know, maybe looking for every penny. We want to audit those areas or concentrate in areas that are more risky. And then once we've identified risk, we'll follow that up with some testing. So to identify risks, the first thing we're going to do is determine risks associated with significant audit areas. Now, the field examiners will assess key and significant areas to determine if there are risks that financial statement information is misstated. The key areas are areas like your cash and investment balances, receipts, disbursements, those types of things. Next, we'll look at what you've done to address any risks. The field examiners will identify what internal controls or mitigating controls that have been put in place to ensure the financial statement information is materially correct. And then the field examiners will determine what areas they can rely on or what the impact of the risks and what you've done to mitigate those risks are, and determine when we can rely on the internal control system and what areas will need to be reviewed in further detail. So, for example, areas that have good internal controls, we can place some reliance on that and not do as much audit testing or audit procedures. But if you have an area of weak controls, we might have to do more testing to get ourselves to the assurance level that that area is materially stated on your financial statements. So once the field examiner has done those things, identified the risks, then they can plan and develop the audit procedures that are going to take place. So audit testing will be conducted in 3 areas: internal controls, substantive, and compliance testing. The policies and procedures that have been implemented will be tested to ensure that they are sufficient and working as intended. As we've said in the past, there needs to be evidence of your internal controls. So for example, if your internal control is person A does the bank reconcilement and person B reviews that, we're going to see evidence that person B actually did review it. I've seen instances where that's the control. Well, I've given it to, Susan over here to review, but there's no evidence that I don't know what Susan does with it. There's no evidence of it. She might just put it in a file or throw it in the trash can or do whatever. So we want to see some evidence that Susan really looks at that in that example. So initials on a bank reconcilement or a signature, an email back to you asking, hey, I had a question about this check, or what's this charge on the bank statement, things like that. Just keep that as documentation to show us that someone actually has performed the test. Field examiners will perform substantive procedures to determine if financial statement information is materially correct. That can include a statistical sample of disbursements, for example, to determine if they were properly recorded in your ledgers and reported on the financial statement, or an analytical analysis of receipts for a certain fund or a group of funds to see if there were material changes from year to year and if they met if we had an expectation that it would stay the same. But it jumped a whole bunch, much more than we expected, then we would probably do more tests to see why. But if it was within our expectations, that substantive procedure, then that would probably be all we would do there. And finally, compliance. The field examiners will perform procedures to determine compliance with state statutes and uniform compliance guidelines. For example, did your expenditures exceed your appropriations? Did you do a bank reconcilement every month like you were supposed to? Were your salaries paid in accordance with the board adopted schedule? Were your disbursements proper and have supporting documentation like they were supposed to? So what are some things that you can do to help prepare for our arrival, maybe save some time? Remember, any time that you save is less time that we have to bill you for, so there is some incentive to have your records in good order. First one is your financial ledger. I know it sounds simple enough, but have it ready after year end. If you have a computerized system, save and make backups, or if you're going to provide us files, when we get there, electronic files, maybe have those ready as opposed to preparing them for us when we get there. If you have hand-posted records, make sure all the pages are complete and together. That sounds, reasonable too, but I have been places where they've had hand-posted records and then I'm flipping through a sheet or a page or two are missing. And when they get, when they got combined together, they either got misplaced or out of order. So make sure all of that is together. And then I accidentally clicked, the next one is bank statements and reconcilements. Have those all completed and together. We've come into a unit before, and the bank reconcilement for the end of the audit period hasn't even been completed yet. We're there in March or April, and the November and December bank reconcilement hasn't been done yet. We can't do much until you get that done. So just have all that information together, get your reconcilements done. If you do online banking or that, you don't get a hard copy of your bank statement or anything, have a plan in mind on how we can see that information. If you're going to print it out for us and keep it, hand it to us when we walk in, that's fine. If we are going to view it on a computer there in your library, have some plan of, okay, I'm going to have person A sit down with the field examiner and bring it up online so that they can see what they need to see. You're not going to give us your username or password for us to look at it, but have some plan in mind before we get there, so that'll just help with some time savings. Have your claims and disbursements, filed in order and ready for us when we get there, including the supporting documentation. If you have electronic claims or you're scanning them in or have them electronically, make sure those files are backed up and saved. And that if you're going to give us, a flash drive or a CD or something with all of your disbursement information on it, have that ready. for us before we get there. Board minutes, resolutions, those types of things are always good to have in one spot or ready for us. Same with contracts, particularly any ones, during an audit year or period that we're going to want to look at. You might save those in an audit file, so you don't have to go find it, 2 or 3 years later after the event when we ask for it. Your policies and procedures, including your internal controls, can be given to us at the start. Your personnel policy, your travel policy, how you accrue vacation and sick leave, if you give cell phones to employees, do you have a policy on that, those types of things. Any financial reports that you filed with the state or federal government, kind of have those in one place. Same with grant documents. If you've got federal grants, there's usually an award letter or an application that you've filled out to get the grant. Those 2 documents have a lot of information on what your requirements are for that grant, and that's what we're going to look at if we audit to see if you're in compliance with it. So try to have those together too instead of digging them up as we get into an audit. A couple of things not listed on the slide or a log of any new forms that you've placed in use. We've talked about that a little bit in the past. The old procedure for getting a form approved for use by the Board of Accounts was you used to send it to us. We would approve it, send it back, and that's if you're not using the prescribed form. That changed a couple of years ago, and now we approve those during the audit process. So the procedure now is to maintain a log of new forms that you've placed in use and give that to the field examiners at the beginning of the audit so that they'll know what forms to look for, and they'll see how you're using them during the period. And if they have no exceptions or no problems with the way you've used the form, then that form is considered approved. If they have an exception, then it'll probably be in that management letter that we've talked about, and then you'll have to make some change to that form. I'm trying to think if we've ever had an instance that I can think of personally where we've not approved a form or something like that, and I think it would be rare. If the form that you want to use instead of the prescribed form has all the information that's on the prescribed form, that's usually enough that we wouldn't have an issue with it. And then the last one not on this slide is Workspace. If you can plan on having a space for us before we get there, that helps. I've been on audits before where I've walked in and the room I was going to work in wasn't ready, so they put me in this room over here while they moved all the stuff out of the room I was going to be in, and then I've got to pack up and move, and I've moved a couple of times in some cases. So not that you have to have a dedicated room for the Board of Accounts by any means, but if we call you on a Thursday and say we're coming on Monday, that's probably the time to start getting that room or that space ready for us instead of Monday morning, just so that we can avoid some of that stuff.
Question?
Yep. Oh, sorry. Her question was if the workspace has to be in a non-public area, and that would be the best scenario. I mean, it's going to depend on if you've got meeting rooms and they're already scheduled out. If there's some other arrangement that you can make, at least temporarily. I know that goes against what I just said, but I think that would be better than out in the open in a public space, because we've got confidential records that we'll have out, and discussions going back and forth between the field examiners, so we probably need to be in a non-public area.
This is a thing that our library has been, every single time that there's an audit. We don't have any private space. We have file cabinets that lock. And so the audit always has to be done off-site, and it's always surprising to whoever the examiner is that that's the case. We do not have that available. I can't imagine that we are the only ones.
Oh yeah, I'm sure you're not. The comment in the room was their library has no private space, so the audit is done off-site, and that's not uncommon, particularly given our staffing situation now in certain areas of the state. If it's more rural or we don't have a lot of people living close by, we might actually come get your records and take them to the county courthouse or to some other unit that has space that we can land. We may do 2 or 3 libraries in a county and go get them all, and so we've got examiners all working on libraries, and that seems to be a little more efficient as far as getting the audit done on time. So
The issue that we had though, and they did take the records
Yeah, the comment in the room was the length of time that the records were out of the library and the lack of communication. I know we do now have a form that the field examiners are supposed to have, any official, if we're taking the records off site, kind of an inventory type form to go over before the records leave. And they should be providing you a phone number and or an email address so that you can contact them anytime you need. And if that's, once a week, if you want to say what's going on. Yeah, that's probably happened since the last time you've been audited. So there should be better communication, and you should be able to always contact that person. So if you've not heard from them for a week and you want to say, hey, how's it going? I haven't heard from you. That's perfectly acceptable. I would encourage that. On the same side, we've tried to tell the field too to do the same, to let you know, hey, things are going okay, or they probably have questions on, hey, what's this claim, or yeah, see that so question in the back, yeah.
Comment and question. So I appreciate what you just said, the idea of communication between the field rep. Actually, I think the last couple of times, a few times you've been here, I've said, Todd, when am I going to be audited? So I finally was audited.
Okay, see.
7 years.
You were
Yeah, it was, but and the young man was fairly new, and I might have been his second or third library. He made all of that clear. So once he got settled, we were good in terms of communication.
Okay.
Before then, I kind of gave him a hard time because he showed up as a surprise in the middle of a Thursday morning when I'm trying to finish my board packet, which means I'm sending something out to my board for an upcoming board meeting and all sorts of documents, including financial documents. And I made it clear, I understood it wasn't him, this is just the process. So when you said earlier you might kind of go back to when they're scheduled, I was kind of interested in hearing that and decided I'd wait to hear what you said about that. But so then, as you're talking right now about location, actually there's location and there are hours, because this young man had sort of a 7 to 4 type schedule, 4 10-hour days, and my building, which he didn't realize, my building had security on it. And I suggested to him, I didn't really want to give him a code. I'm pretty sure he went back and asked someone, this guy doesn't want to give me a code. What should I do? And I told him that he should do that. We did eventually give him a key, and we had a second building that we let him be in. So a number of comments and so a suggestion. These things that you're covering today, I think are great. And if some way in sort of a one-page sort of practical suggestions, hey, your auditor would like to contact you, he'll need some space, he'll need some time. That would be helpful probably to new directors. I mean, I've been around 15 years, I kind of work with him. He probably said this guy's a stinker, but we ended up fine as far as I can tell. And we accommodated his hours, but it took me a week to do so, because I had to figure out something that worked for him. So, for other folks who might not have some of that knowledge, and it would probably be helpful that if some of these could just be placed as sort of tips as you prepare and plan for an audit, to me as a library director, it doesn't need to be every single topic you mentioned,
right,
but just some practical things so that we know some of those expectations. I think that would be helpful, Todd. I really do.
Yeah, that was a lot to try to repeat to the online audience, but the big thing I'll take from that is a really great point about what most of our field examiners work a 5-day week. So they're usually working 7 to 5 Monday through Thursday. And libraries are not traditionally open 7 to 5 or that early in the morning. So there needs to be, something that can be worked out, whether it's a key. Some places will not have a problem giving a key or a code or a fob or something to get in. And you made the arrangements, work, but it took you a week. So if they had communicated, he or his supervisor, I'm going to talk about audit managers and audit coordinators in a minute, who are the supervisors. If they had, communicated maybe sooner with you, that could have been accomplished and that could have been avoided. And sometimes it's not easy, and sometimes we do show up, unannounced. I know it's unfortunate that you were in the middle of preparing your board packet and we walk in the door. There's probably never a good time that we walk in the door for anybody, but that stuff happens. So, I'll go through this federal stuff really quickly because Tyler talked about some of it again or before, but it starts with that schedule of federal assistance, or the CFA. So if you leave a grant off of here, like I mentioned, when you're doing your annual report, that can mean we miss a federal program and you don't get audited as a federal grant or a federal audit, and so that can affect funding in the future. So make sure you get your grant information correct. If we're doing a federal audit, we look at major programs, and a major program is determined by a risk assessment that the field examiner does and a dollar threshold. So if, let's say you had 7 grants, only one of those might qualify as major. So we would audit that major program for the requirements of that program. Did you follow all of those things? We'll also look at what happens right after the audit period before we issue our reports. Sometimes financial transactions occur that could be material to the financial statements and they need to be disclosed. So we'll look for things like, did you issue debt right after the audit period? Or were there any other changes in your financial situation? Lawsuits can be another one. If there's a lawsuit against your library that your attorney feels you're going to be liable for, a $500,000 payment, and you're a really small library, that could be material to those financial statements, so that lawsuit has to be disclosed. So we will ask that the attorney provide us, usually toward the end of the audit, a letter saying that there are no lawsuits, or whether he feels you're liable if there are, pending lawsuits, or if there are any other situations that need to be disclosed. We'll look at those. Generally, they'll look at the audit or the board minutes after the audit period up until the current one. So if you can have those as ready for them to look at. I know sometimes it may be a couple of months later before somebody's able to sit down and actually type up the board minutes, but if you can have something for the field examiners to review, that'll help them. Then we get to the point where we're concluding our field work, so we determine our opinions. I talked about modified and unmodified opinions before. We'll then compile any comments that we have. If you have an examination or an audit being conducted, those comments are going to appear in a report separate from the financial statements called the supplemental report. If you have a compliance report, then you'll only have these items of non-compliance. You won't even have your financial statements, like I mentioned earlier. If you have a centralized compliance report, it's going to have both your financial and compliance issues in one report. The management letter also gets compiled, like Tyler discussed. If you have any less significant or impactful items that aren't going to go in the public report, they get put in this management letter. Then after all that's done, we can schedule the exit conference. But first, everything's reviewed by an audit manager. I talked about manager and coordinator a second ago. Every audit has a manager assigned to it. They're usually not there every day. They might be there once a week or every couple of weeks to review the field examiner's work. Once the audit manager has reviewed the field examiner's work, then they can schedule the exit conference. The exit conference is where the time for the officials to hear what's in the report, to review a copy of the report. So the library director is going to get invited, the treasurer or all the board members will be invited. If you've got a bookkeeper will be, can obviously be there, or anybody else that you feel needs to hear what's going to be discussed at the exit conference, they can be invited. This is also where you have the option to respond in writing. That's where Tyler mentioned earlier, you just think we're way off base on our interpretation or what you did and you want to explain your point of view. That written response gets included in the audit report. I should say before, again, like the entrance conference, before you leave an exit conference, if you have any questions, make sure that the field examiner addresses those. We don't want you leaving that exit and thinking, oh, we talked about something, but I didn't get the impression it was going to be in the report. Now we have management letter, which isn't public, and the public report, so there's going to be a difference. So make sure you understand what's going to be in which report's going to be the public one, which one's not going to be on our website. So feel free to ask any questions. Don't be shy about that. After the exit, then the audit coordinator reviews everything. The audit coordinator is the supervisor for that region. So we have 4 audit coordinators across the state. So basically, if you took the state and divided it in quarters, there's a coordinator responsible for all the audits going on in those, or all the engagements going on in those counties. They review it and then they forward it to the office for our review before the state examiner files the document. So once it gets filed, we get questions a lot about who's going to get a copy of it. The official being examined, which is the treasurer, the president of the governing body would get a copy. Anybody else that requests one. Sometimes we get members of the media will find out that we're in town auditing the library, and they'll call us and say, can you send me a copy of that report when it's filed? So we do that at the same time we send them to you. Once they're filed, they get posted on our website at that link. And that's kind of what it looks like when you go there. Or you can click, if you go to the just sboa.in.gov, on one of the billboards, I think it's the first one that comes up in the middle of the page is the audit reports. You can click there and it takes you to a screen that looks like this where you can search for your library or any other library or any other governmental unit. So you might have any questions about that audit process. Yes?
I should have asked this when they did our exit interview. I don't remember in the past being ever told that I couldn't publicly in a meeting say that we had been examined. Is that something new?
The question was, at her exit conference, she was told not to discuss anything that happened during the audit and whether that requirement was new because she doesn't remember that before.
It's been a long time since my last audit.
Yeah, that is fairly new. There is a statute that talks about the audit process being confidential until that report is filed. So we'll tell you at the exit conference that until that report is filed, the audit is still technically ongoing, and so everything is considered confidential. So we don't want you going back to the next board meeting, which is 2 days after your exit conference, and saying, "Hey, I got a clean audit report," or "They really raked me over the coals," or something like that. Not until the report is filed is it a public document, and then you can discuss it. You can discuss it internally, like if we say, hey, your internal controls in this area were weak, you could have a meeting the next day to discuss how you were going to address that. But you wouldn't want to go out and discuss anything in a public meeting or to the media or anything like that, because by statute it's still confidential. Any other questions?
I don't have any questions
Okay.
in the webinar.
Okay, I will leave you with at least Susan and my contact information. There's my name. And for some reason, I thought as we're putting this together, I would try to put our picture in there. The people online aren't seeing what we look like, and not that they want to see what I look like. But the only picture I could find was my state ID, which is probably worse than a driver's license picture. So I was able to find this little image, which kind of looks like me when I'm taking a call from you, especially the hairdo on that guy. And then there's Susan's image, what she looks like when she's talking to you. So feel free to email this email address, libraries@sboa.in.gov, or give us a call at that phone number if you have any questions. And I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Todd. Now, everybody don't leave yet. We have to put the LEU into the window. And we also have the State of Indiana State Librarian Jake Spear making announcements.
They'll be quick, so. Late in the day, so.
I think I have to do it over here. I hope you close my mouth. Just ignore me.
Okay, so quickly, just a few announcements. We have the Internet Connectivity RFP has been issued for the Internet Consortium. Currently, it's ENA, or Education Networks of America, and that contract goes until June 30th of 2018. And so we have issued an RFP, and we're receiving bids and going through that process right now. We will likely have an announcement about either renewing with ENA or a new provider in January. The State Library recently completed a 5-year evaluation of our federal spending with our IMLS funds. State Library receives about $3 million a year that pays for things such as Inspire and a number of other programs. If you'd like to review that evaluation, it's on our website. We also created a 5-year plan for our federal funds. It's also on the website as well if you'd like to see that. We are working currently with MCLS. They're going to be helping us create 3-year plan for not just the federal fund, which I just mentioned we have, but for the library overall. So it's more of some of the public services that Connie Bruder oversees, and just there's some overlap. Just as an example, for digitization, we both use federal money to digitize, and plus we're digitizing our large collection here, and so we're working on that, and we'll announce that soon. We're going to have a survey that will go out to the library community and ask you to rank our services, saying which one's more important, which one's less important to you. The CERCS application, so our statewide sharing program, we have been adding libraries. There's about 260 plus libraries on CERCS, and we'll be having another window open for applications if you'd like to join that. That'll be coming up in the next month or so. Those libraries that do join would go live sometime in the spring and join the other 260 libraries. LSTA grants, mini grants for technology and digitization will be posted. The applications will be posted either in December or January. So you'll be on the lookout for those. We'll be announcing those. And the last thing I have is the 20th anniversary of Inspire is coming up in 2018. Still can't believe it's 20 years. And so we'll be looking to do an Inspire Day and some other things around that, and hope to have a governor proclamation, honoring Inspire. And so, unless there's any questions, do you have anything else, Karen?
I don't have anything else.
Unless there's any questions for me or Karen, we can wrap up for the day. Okay.
Well, thank you, everybody.